Welcome to the Property Nomads Podcast. Before we get started with today's episode, a couple of apologies. First of all, from myself, number one, there might be a lot of background noise in today's episode. At the moment, just preparing to catch a flight back to Mexico City. So in the process of packing up, there's a lot of outside noise as well, various animals and whatnot that you might hear, air conditioning, etc., etc. So apologies if you hear anything in the background that might put you off, or you wonder why there is noise. That is why. That's a lot going on in the background at the moment. Secondly, this episode was actually meant to be recorded with Mark Champ of War Financial. However, Wi-Fi in the last week or so has been really poor. Every time we've gone to record, the quality's just not been very good at all, and we didn't want to put something of really poor quality out to yourself. So this episode was meant to be with Mark Champ of War Financial. Unfortunately, it's not. I send my apologies because it was an issue my end. We'll be back with Mark in a few weeks' time as well, so stay tuned for that. So all of that being said, what this has led to is a news episode, basically. And this is something we're going to trial moving forwards. When we've been speaking to various people that enjoy listening to the podcast, people have said that a bit more up-to-date information would be good. We're going to be doing a lot more of that on our Patreon channel as well, moving forwards. We thought we'd trial a couple of episodes as well. So as usual, any feedback on this episode would be very useful. We're going to do a few more over the summer as well, like a news summary of the week, what's going on, how that might affect property, and then bringing in a much more macroeconomic approach to things as well. There's generic housekeeping underway. I'll probably do an episode of my time in Mexico as well, how that went, things that I've learned as well. If you're wondering why you've not seen that on any of that on social media, we're not trying to keep these things private, as with basically phone got pickpocketed. It is what it is, not the end of the world. It's actually been quite refreshing not to have my phone on me. That explains why you might have not seen any photos or any excitement on social media or any other things, basically. All that being said, news. What's going on at the moment? Well, in a nutshell, we've got inflation running rife, a potential of global food shortages coming up as well, and also asset bubbles that are either being created or maybe they're teetering on the brink. Who really knows? For those that have listened to the podcast for a while, I said at the end of 2021, the start of 2022, I believe I said something like inflation will be around about 5% for the year. Either I said that or Mark said that, one of the two, and also said that, there's some serious crap that's going to be happening this year. Reason for that, quite simply, is, well, let's go back to pandemic. Obviously, that came out of nowhere. There are people that believe that it is planned. I'm on the fence with that. But anyway, this came out of nowhere, so a pandemic's hit. And, with Keynesian economics and modern monetary theory, really what happened was that most governments around the world decided, as a result of this and the impact that this pandemic has had, people getting locked down, people this, people that, the response from governments or central banks was to print currency. Now that sounds good at the time. That's sounds like it's okay, but as I've said before, that's like having a really deep cut and putting a little plaster on it. There's only so long that is going to help. That's not going to help for a very long time, and we're now starting to see the effects of all this excess currency printing, which is exactly what the government and the Bank of England have decided to do. Print a lot of currency, not as much as the US, but still a relatively significant amount. And that, combined with other things that are going on at the moment, is leading to quite interesting times, shall we say. UK-wise, latest figures at the time of recording this episode, 9% inflation there or thereabouts in April. Again, that's not good. We've got this cost of living crisis going on, as we're pretty much reminded of every single day. We're thankful in a way that actually we don't take a lot of our gas from Russia. I think it's 2 or 3% last time I checked in on the figures. But yes, of course, electric prices soaring, gas prices soaring, rents are soaring, everything's pretty much soaring. That is inflation. In terms of how severe this inflation is, well, we've not experienced anything like this for 40 years. Thankfully, being under the age of 40, but this is completely new to me as well, and I'm sure it's new to most people listening. And these are the reasons why we invest in what we invest in. This is why we have property. I'm not saying property is the absolute answer to everything in the world, but even in difficult times that we've had in the last few years, actually, in terms of property business and that rental income coming in, it's been relatively stable. And I'm sure you, listener, have felt the same with your portfolio, that actually with the rental, the demand is still there, the rental income is still coming in. Yeah, you might have had like the odd tenant or two with issues, but we found, we've done relatively well out of the pandemic, and I'm sure you have as well. Anyway, point being, inflation high. I'm going to try and not beat the same drum over the next few months, over the next year or two. This is here to stay. The reason this is here to stay is because once this pandemic stuff started a few years ago, the response was to print currency, and as a result of that, it's kicked that inflation can further on down the line. In previous episodes, of course, I have said as well, and please don't take this as investment advice, but I have said this as well, that in order to combat inflation, one thing that I would recommend, and this is from studying history and studying things that have gone on before, is that an allocation to physical metals is a very good thing to have in this situation. Gold is a natural inflation hedge. It's proven that it will maintain purchasing power over time as well. Yes, I appreciate the fact that it doesn't give you a return each month, but smart people are purchasing metals. Demand for metals is going up as well, and we do live in these crazy times. When I spoke to my parents briefly over the last few weeks as well, I asked them, what was it like in the 1980s, when we had, the last time we had rampant inflation. And they both said it was concerning. It was chaotic. Was pretty much how they both summed it up. And I'm sure if you're of the age and disposition listening to this episode, you would probably agree with that sentiment in the 1980s as well. Now, this ain't going to get better. As I said, I'm not going to try and beat the same drum month after month after month after month, but this isn't going to get better. Other reasons why this isn't going to get better, purely because, yes, Putin's decided to invade Ukraine. Not ideal by any stretch of the imagination. And then the wonderful Western response to that was, let's put sanctions on Russia. Yeah, great. That really hasn't worked at all. I think most people could see that most skeptical people could see that probably wasn't going to work in the first place. And, surprise, surprise, what have Russia and China been doing over the last 5-10 years? Yeah, funny enough, they have been building up their gold reserves. There's a meme going around. Appreciate that a meme's not easy to see on the podcast, but there's a meme of Joe Biden and Vladimir Putin sat at a table. Basically, Putin is playing chess and Biden is playing checkers, or drafts as we would call it. So, there's a big difference there. Russia and China are thinking very, very long term. What doesn't help from an EU point of view, and again, I appreciate that UK is not in the EU. What doesn't help is people getting on the absolute bandwagon and, getting onto this green energy mumbo jumbo as well. It's, ban Russian gas, ban this, ban that, ban... Okay, great. Well, number one, Russia produces quite a lot of, I think it's palladium or platinum, it's one of the two metals. They produce a hell of a lot of that. Other things that involve producing things for like phosphates as well, which helps agriculture. Now, without the phosphates and other nutrients, etc., that means that the cost of that increases, and that has a knock-on effect, which is why we are probably going to have global food shortages as well. Because, if you're a farmer and you need nitrates and phosphates to, fertilize your land, etc., well, if the supply of that is constricted, that means the price is going to skyrocket. And if you are paying more for your fertilizer, your nitrates, etc., what you're going to do yep, you're going to put that onto the consumer, and hey ho, the consumer is most of the world. So hey ho, that is probably why we're going to end up with a lot of food inflation and global food shortages as well. And again, this probably comes back to these sanctions that the EU, the US have put on Russia, all in the face of Russia invading Ukraine. Now, I'm not saying that I agree with what Putin's doing, and if you listen to other things, goldsilver.com with Mike Maloney, if you listen to Rebel Capitalist Show, George Gammon and other people, we're all singing from the same hymn sheet. We condemn what Russia is doing. It's not good. It's not ideal. Absolutely not. We want it to end as soon as possible, as quickly as possible, and as efficiently as possible. But when we look at the macroeconomic aspects of it, this is where we're going to get some serious problems. Sanctioning Russia and banning gas or whatever, it is having an adverse effect on the very people in our countries. This is why, especially in the EU, UK, etc. This is why we're seeing these increases. This is why we're seeing that. When I checked in for a litre of petrol, like £1.70, £1.70. Crazy, absolute batshit crazy. We're looking at $9-10 a gallon in California, and prices are skyrocketing in Europe. We've almost dug ourselves into a grave here, and by getting on this political bandwagon of let's shake the stick at Russia. Russia's got a couple of things going for it. Number one, gold holdings have increased significantly. Same with China. They're playing a very long-term game. The other thing going forward as well is it's very nutrient rich as a country is Russia. So I just think we need to be careful. And I'm not the only person saying this, but again, I'm not a politician. Do I have a solution? No, I don't have a solution. But putting sanctions on just so it looks like we're doing something, I think is a bit daft, because then the very people that it affects, you and me and other people around the world, we're going to be shaking the stick, going, well, our prices are increasing, petrol's increasing, electric's increasing, blah 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 blah. And at the same time, the very sanctions that our governments are putting on are probably the things leading to this in the first place, as well as printing all the extra currency as well. Last point I'll leave with on this news episode, the Bank of England failings. Now, Andrew Bailey, Bank of England, probably as bad as every other major central banker in the world, following Keynesian theory, modern monetary theory. We're in this issue now where we have a lot of debt. Here in the UK, a lot of government debt, a lot of Bank of England debt, etc., etc., etc. The issue we've got with interest rates, hindsight's a wonderful thing, is number one, they should have probably been increased slightly earlier. But the challenge that you got now is that the Bank of England are going to want to erode the debt away, of course, through inflation. This is what people have been doing for a very, very long time. The challenge is where billions were literally printed a couple of years ago. Again, go back to what I said at the start, it's like sticking a plaster over a deep wound. It's just not going to work for a long period of time, and now it's coming back to bite them on the backside. The kind of issue that you have now is if you were to increase interest rates significantly, you'd probably have a Volcker shock like there was in the 80s in the US, and that's going to create a lot of pain, but it will help things to reset properly. If we don't do that, then all this shit's going to go on for a very, very long time, and it's going to get nastier and nastier and nastier. It is what it is. At the end of the day, you can protect yourself. You can look at purchasing metals, proper money, God's money, as I like to say, and as Robert Kiyosaki and others like to say as well. You can look at doing that. It's a very good inflation hedge. Don't take this as investment advice. You need to do your own homework. You need to do your own research. Again, with property, there are property deals out there. What's your end game? If your end game is to just buy and hold and you're buying for the cash flow, there's still deals to be done. There's always deals to be done if that's your aim. If you're purchasing property and you're then relying on some form of appreciation, capital growth, that can be quite a dangerous game. Just be careful when you are doing that. So there's news in a nutshell. 9% inflation in the UK, there or thereabouts. In April, we've probably got global food shortages coming up due to issues with nitrates, phosphates, potassium, etc., etc., etc. And that's all to do with various sanctions that our wonderful people in the west of Europe and the UK and US have decided to put on Russia. People clearly not thinking things through. But the Bank of England as well, failing their way to oblivion, again following modern monetary theory, which does not work. So we're in a bit of a pickle at the moment. I'll try and not completely beat the same drum moving forward. We'll try and be as level-headed as possible, try not to get angry about the things that are going on as well, because there's a lot of crap going on that needs to be spoken about. And this is what we're going to try and do with these news sections. It's going to be quite contrarian. We're not going to go with the mass media. I'm certainly not going to go with the mass media. I'm a contrarian thinker. So we're just going to try and give a different spin moving forwards, and maybe put a bit more of a generic macroeconomic focus on the podcast moving forward. Let us know your thoughts. Get in contact with us on social media. All the links are in the show notes as well. Email rob@tpmpodcast.com. We do appreciate the feedback. We're going to trial this moving forwards. What I will say is check out the Patreon account as well. We're going to do a lot more macroeconomic stuff on there as well. Some fantastic free content. If you want to help support the podcast and get access to extra content, Q&A sessions, etc., do head over to Patreon. I think it's patreon.com/TPM podcast. The links are in the show notes anyway. Next week, we've got a Property Investing for Beginners masterclass with Rachel Ollington. So check that episode out. That's going to be good fun. Mark Champ will be back in a few weeks with our mortgage update, what's going on as well. So we're going to have a chat in a few weeks. And there's some awesome episodes coming up that involve legal processes, social housing inequalities in the UK, systems and processes, and other bits and pieces as well. So a lot coming up on the podcast, a lot coming up on the Patreon account as well. Thank you for continuing to support the podcast, and I'll also be back with a Mexico update as well, some learnings from running the business from the other side of the world. Until next time, hasta luego.